Namaste and good morning, everyone. Let's start our Sunday Gita class with some prayers where we are thanking Lord Krishna, thanking Rishi Vyas who wrote Bhagavad Gita, and this great scripture, Bhagavad Gita itself. Om Parthaye Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayan Swayam Vyasena Grathitam Puran Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamritvarshini Bhagavati Mashtadashadhyayane Ambtvam Anusandhame Bhagavata Gite Bhavadveshine Namo Astute Vyas Vishal Buddhe Pul Arvind Ayat Patra Netar येन तव्या भारत तैल पूर्णः प्रज्वलितो ज्ञानमया प्रदीपः परपान पारी जाताये तोत्र वेत्र एक पाने ज्ञान मुद्राये कृष्णाये गीता अमृत दुहे नमः सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दोगदा गोपाल नंदना पार्थो वत्सा सुधीर भोक्ता दुग्धम गीता अमृतम महत वसुदेव सुतम देवम कंस चानूर मर्दनम देवकी परमानंदम कृष्णम वंदे जगद्गुरुम भीष्म द्रोण तटा जयद्रथ चला गांधार नीलोत्पला शल्य ग्रावती कृपेन वाहने कर्णेन वेलाकुला अश्वत्थाम विकर्ण घोर मकरा दुर्योधन अवर्तने सो तीर्णा खलु पांडवै रण नदी के वर्तका केशवा पाराशरे वत्सरोजमलम गीता अर्थगंधोटकम नानाख्यानक केसरम हरि कथा संबोधन अबोधितम लोके सज्जन षटपदय रह रह पे मानम मुदा भूयाद भारत पंकजम कलिमल पर ध्वंसी न श्रेयसे मूकम करोति वाचालम पंगुम लंघ्यते गिरिम यत् कृपातमं वंदे परमानंद माधवम यम ब्रह्म वरुण इंद्र रुद्र मरुतः स्तुन्वन्ति दिव्यस्तवे वेदै सांग पदक्रमोपनिषदे गायन्ति यम सामगा ध्यानवस्थे तद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यम योगिनो यस्यन्तं न विदुसुर असुरगणा देवाय तस्मै नमः. In this class, we are on chapter number 14. Gunatraya Vibhaga Yoga. And we are learning about that these guns, the qualities, belong to the Prakriti only, not to the Paramatma. Only the Prakriti. That's why in our Arti also we sing that God is Nirguna. That means beyond the guns. Okay, Nirguna. And what are the names of these three guns? Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. And we talked about that the mode of goodness where we feel peacefulness, well-being, virtue, and serenity. That's called Satvikta. And Rasikta is a mode of passion. That means endless desires, insatiable ambitions of worldly enhancement, want to have more and more and more. That is Rasikta. And what is Tamsikta then? Tamsikta is the cause for delusion, for laziness, for intoxication, for sleep. Sleep means ignorance, darkness, not knowing what to do, what not to do. Okay. So this is what we are learning over here. So Gunatraya Vibhaga Yoga. So we ended our class, last week's class, with verse number 5. Where Lord Krishna is telling us that purity, passion, and inertia. So Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. These qualities, O mighty armed, born of Prakriti, bind the indestructible embodied one fast in the body. So these are like a ropes. These ropes, they bind the indestructible one. What is indestructible one? The Atma, the soul, which is part of Paramatma. So this is the power of this Prakriti. And now today we're going to look at it, how these bind. Verse number 6, Lord Krishna is telling us how the Satvikta binds too. Even though Satvikta is the best of these three qualities, but even Satvikta binds. Tatra Sattvam Nirmaltavat Prakashakam Anamyam Sukh Sangena Badnati Gyan Sangena Cha Anag. Tatra means of these. Sattvam, purity. Nirmaltavat, from its stainlessness. Nirmal, no mal. Prakashakam, luminous. Anamyam, healthy. Sukh sangen, by attachment to happiness. Badhanati, binds. Gyan sangen, by attachment to knowledge. Cha means and, anag means sinless one. Okay. Of these, sattva, which because of its stainlessness, that means there's no flaw in it, is luminous and healthy. It binds by creating attachment to happiness and attachment to knowledge. O sinless one. So Lord Krishna is using this anag word for Arjuna. We all know nothing can be defined as such. This is a fact in all the sciences. See, just like no disease can be defined by itself, nor can any emotion be described as such. We always like to know what the symptoms are, what the expressions are. Even when we go to the doctor asks us, what are the symptoms? Where is the pain? How do you feel? When does it hurt? Symptoms. If there is a fever, how much fever? If you feel dizziness, why? Then he finds out. So that's how the no guns can be defined directly. And we see that in these verses, Lord Krishna is describing a mind under the influence of each one of these guns, by enumerating the type of emotions that are aroused in it. It's like a very peculiar and distinct flavor in the mind. So this is called a symptomatic description. It's very helpful to us because we can look at our own symptoms. Because we all know how to observe, how to analyze the types of emotions and thoughts arise in our mind and intellect, so that we can know, are we in a sattvic mood or a rajasic mood or a tamasic mood? So the very first thing he says, because of its stainlessness, sattva is luminous. When sattva comes to dominate as the most important influence in our thought life, because of its purity, it is ever luminous. It doesn't have the dull color of the Rajasitta, nor the dark impurities of the Tamasitta. So that's the word Nirmaltavad. So when we are under the influence of Sattva, our mind is steady, reflecting ever faithfully the consciousness, the self. And this anamyam word, it also means free from any evil. What do we call evil? What is evil? Evil is any selfish agitation, that's evil for a seeker. Selfishness of the mind. Egocentric desires of our head, that's the evil. So when we are under the influence of Sattvikta, there's no selfishness. Because egocentric self-gratification is the womb from which all evils are born. And whenever the mind is under the influence of Rajsikta or Satvikta, only then these evils sprout. So Sattva is the most divine mental attitude. Still it binds us though. Let's look at it. What is he saying? Why does it bind us? Sattva binds by attachment to happiness and knowledge. So look at that. Happiness. So a perfect one, absolutely free, is bound by these. That means you forget who you are. You are just running towards the happiness which you get from this world. Or just the worldly knowledge. You just get so happy even when you're painting, when you're singing. You just get absorbed into the happiness only and forget about that imperishable which you are. So the person, sure we should be sattvic. The inspiration of sattvikata should be there. But we got to remember that not to forget who we are, which is beyond sattvikata also. That's why he's saying Sattva also binds the infinite to Prakriti through the attachment to knowledge and happiness. It's like a thrilling joys of creative thinking, or even the inspiring life of goodness and wisdom. A person gets so attached to them that will sacrifice anything around in order to live constantly in that happiness. Reflection is always in a reflecting medium. And it will depend entirely upon the cleanliness of and steadiness of the medium. If the mind is clean and the intellect is steady, a more efficient intelligence is manifest. And whenever again the mind is in inspiring and creative mood, it's actually intelligent and capable of taking longest flights into the realms of wisdom. And we just keep on taking those flights and we forget who we really are. We can call it a deep knowing, vast understanding. The inner equipment is under the influence of the sattvika. So it's good, but still if we forget who we are bound. If we just try to identify ourselves, oh, I have learned so much. This makes me so happy. I'm doing a selfless service. The I is associated with all those actions. Because again and again, Lord Krishna is telling us the I, the real I, which you are, is not the doer. It's just the watcher. So this distinction we got to keep while living a sattvic life. Who's the doer and who's the watcher? In the next verse, verse number 7, he's explaining how Rajsikta binds us. Raja rag atmakam vidhi, Trishna sang sam udvam, tat nibdanati konte, karam sangen dehinam raja, the rajas, rag atmakam, of the nature of passion, rag. Vidhi, no. Trishna is the thirst, sang is the attachment. And udvam, source. So the source of thirst and attachment. So Trishna, sang, sam, udvam. That means that nibdhanati, binds, konte, Arjuna, karam sangen, by attachment to action. Dehinam, the embodied one. So Lord Krishna is saying that know that rajas to be of the nature of passion, the source of thirst and attachment. It binds fast. O Konte, the embodied one, by attachment to action. So a seeker who is striving to conquer his own mind must know all its subtle inclinations. Because through these inclinations, again and again, our thoughts run only to return and increasingly, it's almost like sabotaging our inner personality when we run outside. Mind which is running outside. And that's what he says, rajas to be the nature of the passion. So passions are the main symptoms of Rajsikta. And we all know that passion expresses in us in million different urges, desires, emotions, and feelings. But all of them can be just divided into two categories: desires and attachments. Desires and attachment. So Trishna, sang, sam, udho. So that's why Lord Krishna is mentioning these two as the very sources from which all the passions arise. The term used in Sanskrit for desire is thirst. So this Trishna word, that means a thirst that is used for desires. See, just like a thirsty person would struggle, suffer, wanting nothing but water to relieve his pangs. The same way a human personality thirsts for the satisfaction of every desire that burns him down. So that's why this Trishna word is for desires. And once the desire is fulfilled, what happens? A sense of attachment comes. It's almost like a vicious passion to smother down all the peace and joy of the mind. So desire is our mental relationship towards the objects which we have not yet acquired. Okay, desire. So something we don't have it, we just want it. That's a desire. Attachment is called a mental slavery, which binds us to the objects we have acquired. So you can see the relationship between the desire and the attachment. Something which we don't have, we desire. Something we already have, which we wanted, we get attached to it. We don't want anybody else to have it. So these two, desire for the acquisition of the things and the creation of situations. It's not just only the objects. It could be the situations, it could be the relationships, which are expected to yield a certain quota of personal happiness. Because why do we want it? For our personal happiness. And that's why we get clung to it. That's called attachment. Okay. It's almost like a volcano in our mind. And when the volcano is erupting, we forget who we are. So that's why Rajsikta binds us. It binds so fast the embodied one by attachment to action. Because if we have a lot of desires, a person who has a lot of desires will be very active too, constantly working. And in today's terminology, we call it a workaholic. Day and night, work, lot of desires. When an individual has come under the influence of Rajsikta, he expresses countless desires and feels attached. Such a passionate person, goaded by his desires for things not yet acquired, crushed under the weight and responsibility of his attachment to things he possesses. Because that's also a binding, can never keep quiet. I'm talking about the mental quietness. That's why this kind of a person endlessly keep on earning, keep on spending, and still thirsty for more and more. Because in this area, sky is the limit. We often talk about it, that a person was very happy with a few $100,000 in the bank account until he met a millionaire. A millionaire was happy until he met a billionaire. So more and more and more. That is called the thirst. Anxious to have more, fearing to lose what you have. A person becomes entangled in the joys of his successes. And it gets involved into the pangs of the failure too. Because there's always a two sides to this coin. If there's a success, there is a failure also. And lives as an embodied one, chained by his own actions. So remember, actions are born of passions. Passions arise from desires and attachments. And these are all the symptoms of a Rajogun, Rajsikta, which has a very powerful influence on our mind. So if the Sattva binds us with its own anxieties for happiness and peace, wisdom and knowledge, Rajogun also binds us because of all this, the desires and the attachments. Actually, the Rajasic person constantly thinking that I am the doer. Very strong I do mentality in a Rajasic person. Now let's look at in verse number 8, how Tamsikta binds us. Tamhatu agyan jam vidhi mohanam sarv dehi nam pramad alasya nidra bhi tat nibhnati bharat. Tamha, inertia. Tu means what? Agyan jam, born of ignorance. Vidhi means no. Mohanam, deluding. Sarvdehi nam, to all embodied beings. Pramad is carelessness. Alasya is laziness. Nidra bhi, the sleep. So by carelessness and laziness and excessive sleep. That means that nibhadanati, binds fast. Bharat is for Arjuna. But know that tamas is born of ignorance. Okay, and what is the ignorance? Ignorance is not having the knowledge. See, ignorance is opposite of the knowledge. Ignorance. Deluding all embodied beings, it binds fast, O Bharat, by carelessness, laziness, and sleep. So we often talk about this sleep. People say that we should not be sleeping then. No. We need some sleep, but this sleep means just sleeping towards this higher purpose. Sleep. Or even it could be excessive sleep also, because that's a laziness. So tamas is born out of ignorance. That is the very first thing he says. Tamatu agyan jam vidhi. So under the influence of tamas, a person's intellectual capacity to discriminate between the right and wrong gets veiled. And that person starts acting as if under some hallucination. So Lord Krishna says that tamas in the human personality binds it to its lower nature by providing it with endless, you can call it a misconceptions. That's a delusion and misapprehension towards the divine purpose of life. And that's why when you don't have a purpose in life, divine purpose in life, you are lazy or careless of the higher purposes, the real goal of life. So a person is asleep to the nobler and the diviner aspirations of life. There's no consistency of purpose in a tamasic mind. There's no brilliance of thought and even no tenderness of emotion, or even a nobility of action. Because a person who comes under the contamination of the tamo guna doesn't see it. So these three guns not only bring about different amounts of divine brilliance in a given individual, but also limit the eternal self in all its perfection. Now, verse number 9, he says, Sattvam sukhe sanchati, Rajaha karmani bharat, Jnanam avrityetu tama, Parmade sanchati. Sattvam, purity, sukhe, to happiness, sanchati, attaches, Raja, the active force, karmani, to action, Bharat, Arjuna, Jnanam, knowledge, avritte, shrouding. Tu means verily, Tamaha means inertia. Parmade, carelessness. Sanchati, attaches. Ut means that. Sattva attaches to happiness. Rajas to action. O Bharat, while tamas verily shrouding knowledge attaches to carelessness. So it's like in summary, he is telling us this. So previous three verses where he described little bit in detail, he is summarizing. It's like stringing them together, all three. Sattva gun illuminates the intellect with knowledge. So knowledge is there, but if it's not accompanied by spiritual wisdom, then what happens with the knowledge? The worldly knowledge, the secular knowledge results in pride. And that pride comes in the way of devotion of God. You can often see that in the case of scholars, the scientists, the people with very, very high degrees. So the mode of goodness is predominating in them because they have spent a lot of time and energy cultivating the knowledge, And yet the knowledge they possess often makes them proud, and they begin to feel that there can be no truth beyond the grasp of their intellect. Or even the senses. They say, we cannot see it. Where is God? They find it difficult to develop faith towards either the scriptures or the godly or God realized saints also. So that is the problem with the Sattvika. Because we can often understand how Rajsikta binds or Tamsikta binds, but often people say that how can Satvikta bind? Knowledge is good, but then on the other hand, we got to have a knowledge of the higher also, the diviner also. Whether you want to call it God or you want to give some other word to it, but the divinity, the creator of all this. So Sattva attaches itself to happiness. So he's not against the knowledge, but who's the creator of the knowledge? Try to understand that also. And not just this happiness, which has the opposite of that, the sadness also. The God or the soul or the spirit, there's no sadness in there. It's only the bliss. There's nothing but bliss and peace. In the worldly sphere, we see the happiness and then we see the unhappiness also. So if we constantly want to have happiness from this world, it binds us. This matter binds us. And Rajsikta, as I said, we all know. We are very familiar with it. Because predominantly we are Rajsik as human beings. A lot of desires, and we just unknowingly keep on multiplying our desires, the worldly desires. And Tamsikta, we can see that laziness, depression, sadness, no higher purpose. Sure, we are bound. When do the guns produce the effect? These effects is described next. Rajas tamacha abhibhuya sattva bhavati bharat raja sattvam tamacha eva tamasatvam rajatata. This is verse number 10. So rajas, tam, you know these terms now. Cha means and, abhibhuya, having empowered. Sattva, then bhavati means arises, and bharat is Arjun. Raja sattvam tama. Cha means and, ev means even, tama sattvam rajatata. So he's using the same terms to describe it, that how one takes over the others. So now sattva rises. Rises means prevails. O Bharat, having overpowered rajas and tamas. Now rajas having overpowered sattva and tamas. And tamas having overpowered sattva and rajas. So Lord Krishna is explaining how the same individual's temperament oscillates among the three guns. So these three guns are in us all the time. And I like to give the example of the three wrestlers. They are competing with each other. One is becomes more powerful and throwing the other two down. So sometimes the first is on the top, sometimes the second, and sometimes the third. So that means sometimes we feel predominantly sattvic and sometimes predominantly rajasic, and then there are times when we feel tamasic also. So these three are always present in us. So at this level of our discussion, sure, any intelligent student will wonder whether these guns produce their effect or act at different times, each by turn. So how does it happen when we think it deeply? So that's why Lord Krishna, just sensing that what could be our question, he is explaining how these guns act at different times. Each one of them becoming prominent and powerful for the time being. Right now we are studying this, trying to understand it peacefully. So the Satvikta has taken over. It's almost like when we are in our own temple, in front of the altar, we feel very Satvik. So the same thing we are feeling right now. But if any discussion, any argument starts to take over the class, sure, there will be Rajsikta. It's aggression there. And without looking at why we are discussing, we start arguing and putting each other down. That is Tamsikta. So in the same person, in the same group, these three are always there. So that's what he's saying. The Sattva rises. The other two guns are not totally absent. They just have only a secondary importance. They are there, but they are not very powerful. So when we say that one is under the influence of Sattva, it means that Rajas and Tamas in that person are not so prominent at that time. Okay? They are still present. So when Sattva predominates over Rajas and Tamas, it produces at that time happiness and knowledge. And when Rajas dominates over Sattva and Tamas, it will express its own nature. Because whatever is prominent will express its nature. So Rajasic nature is a passion, desires, attachment, and action. So that means when we are arguing with somebody and we want to make our point, we want to make sure the other person believes in us, that means we have a desire. And desires are related with this. And when Tamas predominates over Sattva and Rajas, it produces its own effects of shrouding knowledge. We forget about what we learned. And Tamsikta will make the personality careless also. All the nobler duties can be forgotten when we are under the influence of Tamsikta. Depending upon the external environment, because external environment is also affecting us, and the internal contemplation and the sanskars of past lives, one or the other gun begins to dominate. So that's why it's very important to keep the external environment sattvic, our thought patterns sattvic, and our old sanskars, we really don't have much control over it. But to try to add more and more sattvikta into our life, so that we don't forget what the purpose of life is. But how are we to know when a particular gun is predominating over the other gun? Verse number 11. Sarvadvareshu dehe asmin prakash upajayate jnanam yada tada vidyat vivridam sattvam iti ut. Because as Gita students, we want more and more sattvika in our life. How do we know there's a sattvika predominating or not? Sarvadvareshu, through every gate, and gate means our senses. Dehe, in the body, asmin, in its, prakash, light, that means wisdom, upajayate, shines. Jnanam, knowledge, yada, when, tada, then, vidyat, it may be known. Vivridham, predominant. Sattvam, sattvika, purity. Iti means thus, ut means indeed. When through every gate, every sense in the body, the light of intelligence shines, then it may be known that sattva is predominant. So over here, the discussion of the 3 verses, each giving us a more subjective insight into the symptoms produced by the gun concerned, from which we can understand which gun is influencing us at any given moment. So in this verse, he is talking about sattvika. When through every gate in this body, the light of intelligence shines. These gates are like apertures of the physical structure. Through these apertures, we perceive the world of objects. We perceive it, that means they enter into us. These are also called the inlets or the windows of knowledge, the sense organs. And I'm sure you all know what these sense organs are. Our eyes, our ears, our nose, the power to touch, the power to taste. Through these holes, the light of awareness goes out. And that's how the various objects of the world, they shine. So the knowledge in me pouring out through the eyes becomes the power of vision and illumines for me all the forms and colors of the world. And the same eternal awareness through the ears, which cannot illumine form. See, ears cannot see the form, but they can comprehend the world of sound around me. So the divine light of cognition beaming out through the tongue illumines the taste. These are called, some people have called this 7 tongues of flame. They shoot out from the same fire of knowledge, the self in us. Each beam of light is almost like emerging from each window of the body. It must be the experience of all that we are perceiving something, and that's how the illumination happens. We all are familiar with when the mind is agitated by Rajsikta, or when our intellect is veiled by Tamsikta. Even ordinary perceptions become almost impossible. We don't even see directly. We don't even hear properly. But when there's a sattvika, there's more clarity. We can understand. We can even understand something said between the words also. We can understand the subtlety of the poem also. Or we can really go deep into the sound also. So, but if the mind is agitated, if the mind is totally disturbed, full of anxiety, we cannot feel any of it. So our heart full of sattva, the capacity to observe, capacity to analyze, or to even understand, we become more aware of the world outside and we can judge it rightly. This is the light which is talking about. Eyes will see exactly what it is. Ears will hear the subtlety of what somebody is even talking to you. So the right kind of information is being perceived. It's going. So inlets are doing their job properly when satvikta is present. Because the mechanism of knowing the world outside is the intellect. We know that. And the consciousness reflected in the intellect is the light of intelligence by which we illumine the world of ideas, feelings, and objects available in our life. It's almost like a sunlight. Outside never comes directly to the room to illumine the things in the room. It's always the light of the sun reflected on the walls that illumines a room. So the same way the light of consciousness reflected in the intellect is the beam of light that illumines the world of objects. So the guns are the influences under which the mind and intellect live. So that's why we are told, clean your mind, keep your intellect clean, keep it steady, because this is the reflecting medium and it will reflect more efficiently if there's a steadiness. Because rajas creates agitation, makes the intellect unsteady. Sattva keeps it steady. And tamas creates the veiling and makes the intellect unclean, makes it dirty. So reflection is not there. So naturally, the greater the proportion of rajas and tamas, the lesser will be the quota of intelligence. So it's a highly scientific way Lord Krishna is teaching us that at the moment of knowing and comprehending the world, that means at that time there's a more and more satvikta in us. Now in the next verse, we'll see the characteristics, marks that indicate the predominance of Rajsikta in us. In a very scientific way, Lord Krishna is opening this up for us. So we got to see what we are getting and how we can use it also in our daily life to move upward. So let's stop it here. And we'll start our next week's class with verse number 12. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadai Purnameva Visheshyate Om Shanti 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 Om. Thank you very much.